Hey everyone, I'm Chase, a Rocky Mountain HVMC, and this is our kids' dirt bike overview of the Honda CRF110F. All right everyone, thanks for checking in. So as many of you know, Honda has a really good lineup of bikes for youth riders or riders that are just getting started. And today in this video, we're talking specifically about the CRF110F. This is a very popular bike for youth riders, and it's also a really popular bike for adults looking for a pit bike. So we're going to talk all about this today. Now what's great about the F-Series bikes, and I want to point this out because it's important, the F-Series of bikes from Honda aren't meant to be race bikes. The F is actually for family, and it's really more for recreational riding, trail riding, just for people to get together and have some fun and learn to ride a dirt bike. Now in 2019, what's cool is that Honda, they didn't just forget about their youth and beginner bikes, they actually revamped their F-Series lineup, and we're going to talk about all the updates that they did, but one of the biggest ones that we're so happy to see is these are now fuel injected. That's right, no more messing with those finicky carburetors. On a lot of these smaller bikes with those carburetors, you got small jets in there. They sit for too long. It can be a hassle to try and clean those out. You know, at higher elevations, they might not run as good. And also when it's cold outside, sometimes it can be a hassle to get these to start. So now you got fuel injection, so you don't have to worry about that. So we're going to go through, we'll talk about the history of this bike, we'll talk about the sizing of it, the specs, and also we're going to bring in some youth riders. We're going to have them get on the bike of different sizes and ages to help you know if your rider is going to be a good fit for this bike. And then lastly, we're just going to give you some tips and tricks to help you get the most out of these smaller bikes. So let's get started. So the first time we saw the CRF110F was back in 2013, and when this came out, it replaced the CRF70F in Honda's lineup. Now, even though the 70 is smaller cc size, that bike was actually very comparable as far as sizing goes. It's actually just a little bit taller than the 110. Now, also, Honda had for several years the CRF80F and the 100F, but don't let the cc size fool you on those two bikes because they are actually a little bit taller than the 110. So if you are shopping for maybe an older bike, trying to save some money, just remember that the 80 and the 100 are taller than the 110F, and we have those specs on our website in this video that you can look at. But like I said, in 2019, Honda, what's great to see is that they revamped their F-Series of bikes. So now you have the updated plastic, which is the same plastics as a race bike, so it has that new aggressive look to it. They also updated the frame, so you have a steel twin spar frame, which allows them to get a little bit more suspension in the rear. They made the front a little bit more raked out by about 1 degree, so it makes the bike a little bit more stable. And like I said, the big update here is also with the carburetor being gone, so there's now fuel injected, which is awesome. Now, as far as price point goes for these, new they're going to be around $2,400, but if you look hard, if you're patient, you can find an older 110F at a great price. But you just have to remember that anything less than 2019 or previous to that is going to be carbureted, so that is going to be a trade-off if you decide to try and find something a little bit older at a lower price point. Now, as far as specs go for this bike, it's a 109cc air-cooled engine with a 4-speed automatic clutch. Now, the engine on these bikes is one thing that hasn't really changed at all since 2013, but we're actually okay with that because these engines, they are bulletproof. They go forever. You just got to make sure you're changing your air filter, doing your oil changes, but these engines are very reliable. And like I talked about earlier, when this replaced the CRF70F, this engine does have more power and quite a bit more torque. So it's been a great engine, so we're not really too upset that they didn't really do anything different to it when they updated the bike in 2019. But aside from that, what's great is you have an electric start on this bike. So you've got your starter over here on the right side. Also, it's a keyed ignition. And the reason that we like a keyed ignition, especially for smaller bikes, is that this way you can proof the bike so that your youth riders, the Mr. or Little Misses, can't take the bike when you're not around. So as long as you have the key out of the bike, there's no way to start this thing. So you've got an electric start, but also you have a backup Kickstarter, which is nice. So if this bike does sit for a long period of time, maybe over the winter, and the battery doesn't have any juice in it when you go to start it again, you can kickstart it, fire it back up, and you're going to be good to go. Now, another nice thing about this bike is that on the throttle, you actually have an adjuster screw. And this adjuster screw will actually change how much you can open the throttle. So if you have a rider who's just starting out, they're kind of working up their confidence, if you want to slow down the top speed of the bike, you can just use that adjuster screw to do that. Also, too, you'll notice here that on the power switch, you have a check engine light, which is nice. So if there is something going on, that light will pop on, and then you can see there's your electric start button right here at the bottom. Now, like I mentioned too, this is a 4-speed automatic. So what's great about this bike, it's a really good transition from something like, say, a fully automatic bike like a PW50, where you don't have to shift whatsoever, you just get on the gas and go. But now you have 4 speeds or 4 gears, you shift up through those, but there's no clutch. So what's nice about not having the clutch is the youth rider learns to shift through the gears, but they don't have to worry about stalling the bike because they don't have that. Now, if you're looking at the CRF80F and that 100 I talked about, those actually do have a clutch. That is one big difference that you'd want to be mindful of. So aside from that, like I said, the changes that they went through, you had that steel twin spar frame now, which added a little bit, about a ½ inch of travel to the rear. So you have 3.8 inches of travel in the rear for the suspension, 3.9 inches up in the front. Now, I do want to point out, this is kind of one of our complaints about the 110F, is that with the rear suspension, it's pretty stiff. And we think that the reason that Honda does that is because this is such a popular bike for adults looking for a pit bike that they make the suspension a little bit stiff in the rear. So for youth riders that are just starting out, it's not going to be as plush as we think it could be. So that is kind of one of the trade-offs that we do find with this bike. As far as fuel capacity goes, you have 1 gallon fuel capacity. Now, you do lose a little bit of the fuel capacity from the previous 110, but what's nice though is that being fuel injected, you actually increase your fuel economy, so you're still going to get pretty much the same amount of distance out of one tank. But here is one difference. Because you don't have the carburetor, you don't have a petcock, there's no reserve on this bike. So you do have a light up in the front that will kick on when you're running low on fuel, but you really have to pay attention to that because when that light comes on, you have about a quart of gasoline left, but there's no reserve that you can just switch it to if you think you're gonna run out. So as soon as that light comes on, you wanna make sure that you do get some more fuel in there. Now for brakes, you have drum brakes in the front as well as the rear. Now drum brakes aren't going to be as good as a disc brake, but these brakes do work well. So for youth riders that are just getting started, these brakes are going to be just fine. Now weight, that's one other little drawback that we have about the 110F is it is a little bit heavy. It weighs about 170 pounds. So, for youth riders that are just getting started, it might be a little bit heavy. It might be difficult for them to pick this bike up if they do have a tip over. So let's talk about who this bike is for. Like I mentioned earlier, it's really important to know how big this bike is and also what size rider is going to be a good fit. Now for the 110F, as far as seat height goes, you're 25.9 inches. Now if you compare that to the 125F in their lineup, which is the next bike up, it's going to be just over 3 inches shorter. Now when you look at the CRF50F, it's actually 4.5 inches taller than that bike. And like I mentioned earlier, when this replaced the CRF70F, like I said, these bikes are very comparable. In fact, the 70F was about 0.2 inches taller than the 110. Now, if you compare this to other popular 110 models from different manufacturers, it's about a ½ inch shorter than the Yamaha TTR 110 and about an inch shorter than the KLX 110 from Kawasaki. But we've built a nice little chart for you where we have different bikes with their sizes so you can see exactly where the 110F fits in with other bikes that you might be interested in. But now, we're going to bring in my niece and nephew, who this bike actually belongs to, and we're going to tell you their sizes, their ages, to help give you a good reference to know if your rider is going to be a good fit for this bike. All right, so now I have my niece and nephew here in the studio with me. I've got Oakley and I've got her little brother Gavin. Now this bike, my brother actually bought it so that both of these two could ride it. Now Gavin, he's been learning really quickly, so you're about to see that Gavin, he's on the small end for this bike, and then Oakley kind of hits that sweet spot. So we're going to have them both get on the bike real quick. So Gavin, you're going to come over first. So Gavin is 7 years old. He is 4 feet 2 inches tall. And when Gavin gets on here, and I tilt this up straight, you can see he's got about 2-3 inches of space between his feet and the ground. That's why I say that Gavin at 4 feet 2 is too short for this bike. But because of his skill level, he's getting good really fast. He's getting more confident, so we're not too worried about that. But what's nice though is that Gavin's going to have this bike for a few years. He's going to grow into it really nicely. So now Oakley, I want you to come around here. Now Oakley is 10 years old. And she is 4 feet 8 inches tall, so 6 inches taller than Gavin. So when she gets on here, she's kind of the sweet spot. You can see she's flat-footed. She doesn't have too much of a bend in her knees. So with the 110F, as far as Oakley goes, she's a really good reference as far as what size rider is going to be a great fit for this bike, just right off the bat. Again, 10 years old, 4 feet 8 inches tall. So use these two as a frame of reference to know if your kid is a good size for this bike. So now that you know what size rider is a good fit for this bike, let's just talk about a few tips and tricks just to help you out to get the most out of it. So first and foremost, for the older models of the 110, also the 70, the 80, and the 100, the 125, whatever it is you might have, the carbureted versions, they're pretty cold-blooded. which means they're hard to start in colder temperatures. So what we recommend is get the Tusk Cold Start Jet Kit. You just pick that up, you install the new jets, it makes it a lot easier to start those bikes in colder temperatures. And if you do have a bike that's been sitting for a long period of time and you feel like the carburetor needs to be gone through and cleaned up, it's never a bad idea to go through there, clean out those jets. But also, if you're doing that, you might as well just pick up that Cold Start Jet Kit and you're gonna be good to go. As far as the fuel injected models, again, that's a big bonus because that's not something that you have to worry about. You know, some other great things to have on this, you can see on the left side here, we've got a new shift lever. This is a Tusk folding shift lever. You know, the stock one is not folding, so if they do crash or tip over, those do bend pretty easily, so it's never a bad idea to get a folding shift lever on there. Handlebars. It's another big upgrade to get. The stock handlebars on this bike are steel. And steel handlebars are great because they're inexpensive, but they do bend pretty easily. So we've got some ODI handlebars on here. This is the 110 handlebar from these guys. I do want to point out though that these handlebars are the same width as a standard adult handlebar. So we cut them down a little bit. We actually cut 1 inch off of each side, so 2 inches total, just to make them a little bit more narrow, a little bit more comfortable for the rider, but also that's gonna allow you to still be able to get your controls on there because these cables, if you leave these the full width, it's hard to get enough length out of those cables to get everything to fit. But handlebars, great upgrade to have. And then when we talk about tires, tires is actually really important. Now, if you're buying one of these things new, it's not really something you have to worry about. But if you have an older model or an older bike in general that has pretty worn out tires on there, you know, a big factor with youth riders is giving them as much confidence as possible. So in having tires that have good traction, it's only going to make it a little bit easier for them. So if your tires are pretty worn out, never a bad idea to get some fresh rubber on there. And the last thing is just giving a cool customized look for the rider. As you can see, we sell full custom graphics kit for the 110F and other great youth bikes. So if you want to deck this thing out and make your rider feel like their bike is custom just for them, pick up a graphics kit. We also do have some other little bling pieces too, like the oil plug that we have on this bike. So if you want to do some customization, we've got a lot of great parts to do that. And that is it. That is our overview of the CRF110F from Honda. Like I mentioned earlier, these things are bomb-proof, so if you can find one at a great price, either used or if your rider fits the bill as far as sizing goes, go to your local dealership, pick up one of these things new. It's going to be an awesome bike for you. If you have questions or comments, leave those below. We want to get those answered. And if you have one of these, if you have some other tips or tricks that you've noticed has really helped you out, well, we want to hear those, so make sure to leave those below as well. And to pick up any of the parts, any of the accessories that we talked about today, all you have to do is just click on the link or head over to RockyMountain-ATVMC.com. All orders over $75 ship free. And an easy way just to see all the parts that we carry for the 110 and other great youth bikes out there is all you have to do is enter the year, make, and model of the bike on our homepage, and you'll see everything that will fit your bike. I'm Chase at Rocky Mountain. We'll see you on the trails.